I'm going to keep my mask on, but you can just do whatever you feel comfortable.
Hello, and welcome to the event. This short video will give you a little bit of background to Newington Green Meeting House and let you know a few things to keep in mind during this event. With funding from the National Lottery Heritage Fund, New Unity has transformed its Newington Green Meeting House into a fully accessible, free heritage space, showing its radical history and encouraging visitors to think differently. The building, which was a hotbed of revolutionary thinking in the 18th century, holds stories of Richard Price, Anna Letitia Barbauld, Andrew Pritchard, and most notably Mary Wollstonecraft, leading to it being described as the birthplace of British feminism. The meeting house hosts a regular programme of events and exhibitions celebrating this history and serving its local community. Find out more online. During this virtual event, please keep the following things in mind. The event is being recorded, so please turn off your webcam if you do not want to be seen in the recording. You can do this by clicking on your picture and turning off your camera. You can also change your name by clicking on your name and choosing the rename option. We ask you to stay muted throughout the event unless you're invited to speak, or if you'd like to say something, let us know through the chat. Please share your thoughts, comments and questions via the chat function. And any questions in the chat will be addressed at the end of the session. Thanks for listening, and we hope you enjoy the event.
Everyone, and welcome to Newington Green Meeting House. Thank you so much for joining us this evening to celebrate Mary's birthday, and if you've been joining us for some of the other events this week, you've realised that this is just one of many. But today it's really about celebrating Mary and Newington Green and the local area. And obviously Mary means an awful lot to people in the congregation here at New Unity and that are local and that know Newington Green Meeting House. So today we have a selection of people that have come to share the words of Mary and celebrate Mary's life, from performances to readings to talks about how Mary's politics and legacy relates to today. So first up, I am so honoured to have the Sainte Union School and students performing a piece inspired by Mary's work. So I will let them take over.
Virtue can only flourish among equals. How grossly do they insult us!
These not words!
I'd rather be a rebel than a slave.
As horses thundered around Tatnam Corner, Epsom Derby, Emily Wilding Davidson jumps in front of the King George's V's colt. Suffragette Gazette! Suffragette Gazette! Suffragette Gazette! Suffragette Gazette! Anyone interested in a Suffragette Gazette?
Princess Sophia, the goddaughter of Queen Victoria, refuses to pay tax. No vote, no tax.
Which one is Malala?
One child, one book, one teacher, one pen can change the world.
The beginning is always today.
Hello, Amy has asked me to say a few words about the sculpture of Mary Wollstonecraft. How I did it and why I did it. So the first is how. I've sculpted all my life, both direct carving, that is carving bits of marble or stone and making them into various forms. And on the table behind me you can see an egg shape, which was carved out of a block of marble, which you can also see to the side. You use hammer and chisels and that sort of thing to make the shape that you want. The second and my main way of sculpting, which I've done throughout my life, has been to use clay. Clay is heavy and it's unstable. So you need to have a support within it, which is called an armature. The main sort of armatures are usually about, head and shoulder, this sort of shape that I've got here. And I've left that on the table, which is in clay, which has then been cast into glass fibre and bronze by the side. So here's the original, which has got an armature inside, support, and this is the final sculpture. The Mary Wollstonecraft sculpture was quite big, so I needed a much larger framework inside it. And just behind there you can see at the top would have been her head, and these metal sections would be for her arms, her shoulders there, her arms, and then the main part of her body would form there. It's huge, difficult, hard work. Once completed, is still soft and malleable, so it has to be transported quite carefully to the caster. And my caster is in Tottenham, and he took the mould of Mary Wollstonecraft, took a mould from it and cast it into the bronze and glass fibre that you see in the meeting house. Now the question is why? Well, I was brought up in South Wales, and in a section called Sainte City, which means in Welsh 7 houses. Our house was one end and City Farm was the other, and between were cottages and the remains of a chapel, which was the chapel where the Dr. Reverend Richard Price's father used to preach. When I moved to London, from 1970, I lived in Springdale Road, which is about 800 metres from the meeting house, and then to Newington Green Road, which is maybe 600 metres from the meeting house, and then to Malmay Road, where I am now, which is maybe 400 metres from the meeting house. So for the whole of my life, I've been within really 3/4 of a mile of revolutionary meeting house, and know intimately and for all that time the Reverend Richard Price, Letitia Barbold, Mary Wollstonecraft, and others. Now, Mary Wollstonecraft for me represents something really powerful and important. Someone who, during her time, did the most extraordinary things, going to France during the French Revolution, and after quite a lot of family difficulties, living there with her common law husband, Imlay, and because of her love for him, did all sorts of things, including having a baby, Fanny. After she left him and came to England and married Godwin, she came before that and had support and love of the people in the meeting house. As she's an 18th century figure, when I sculpt anyone, I usually carry out quite a lot of research. So for Mary Wollstonecraft, I looked at original sources, the primary sources, that is, her own writing, the vindication of the rights of man, her letters and so forth, but also secondary sources, the sources, wonderful writings by academic women such as Clary and Gordon and Thomas I. Many of them have written wonderful, wonderful analytical studies of Mary Wollstonecraft. All of them have understood as the core of her work and her understanding about her life is of control or agency. We have very few records of her physically, but we do have the painting by Opie where she's wearing a modest muslin dress of the day and jacket, and she's wearing her trademark hat, which is a nod to the French Revolution, the Phrygidian cap of the French Revolution. Clothes for her were not something to be tossed aside. They actually represented something. Were extremely important. And therefore, in my understanding and wishing to portray her, she had to be represented in clothes which she recognised and she wanted to be recorded as part of her understanding of her life and her life's work in that portrait that was made by John Opie in the year of her death. It's quite a powerful painting. It's quite a modest one. She isn't engaging in John Opie's gaze, the male gaze. She's looking to the side, but looking thoughtful, quiet, pensive, in the clothes that she chose to be represented by. Therefore, for me, to honour her memory, the only way she could be represented and the way she would understand and represent women in general would be the way I have done. Not as some abstract, completely abstract form or some average woman in womanly shape, but someone who was like her, a copy, if you like, in sculptural form of what she agreed was how she wished to be represented. Not something that I had magicked up myself, but something that represented the way she wished to have control over her image. And that's why, for me, she's represented as she is. And is in the meeting house where she found intellectual support and recognition of her importance and her intellectual drive. She was accepted for who she was and understood as being a powerful and helpful voice for women.
I've got some words now from Simon Cole, who you might better know as the guy behind Hackney Tours, who is a big Wollstonecraft fan and does lots of work with us at the Meeting House and in Hackney to share her radical history. And I'm going to be reading it on behalf of Simon. So the first line is, when I arrived in Hackney in 2009, but that's Simon's life, not mine. So it's called Walking with Wollstonecraft's Ghost. When I arrived in Hackney in 2009 for a week-long stay that shows no signs of ending, I had no idea who Mary Wollstonecraft was. But as I began to wander the Hackney streets, looking at information panels in places like Newington Green, I realised that the history here was exciting, thrilling even. Radicals, reformers, revolutionaries had battled for things like rights and against things like slavery, here in what used to be a rural escape from London. The themes were timeless, their stories as relevant as ever. In 2021, the dissenters' prize value of tolerance continued to be squeezed by a backlash against woke, against, say some, enlightenment itself. Mary Wollstonecraft successfully fought the reactionary undertow, even if it was eventually washed away with her reputation for 2 centuries. She lived quite the life. She was an educator, a philosopher, a journalist, an editor, a good friend, a lover, a reluctant wife, a mother, a single mother, a businesswoman, an adventurer, and yet more permutations of what it means to fully be alive. She had the French Revolution, we have Brexit and Trump. 2020 recalled the political division, but also the engagement of the 1790s on both sides of the Channel. Progressives here hoped for a reduction in the power of the monarchy and a bigger role for the new middle class. Conservatives feared the mob and the very end of civilization itself. Or at least that was the spectre they raised to dissuade dissent. If Mary did not live long enough to see the Peterloo massacre here, she did see the French Revolution turn nasty. She knew her share of the political strife in the long 18th century that preceded Peterloo, times that would eventually lead to the Age of Reform, with its votes for the working class and ultimately women. But of course, she was ahead of all of this in so many ways. She is rightly celebrated for her groundbreaking work on gender equality, way before the suffragettes, though of course not as early as Mary Astle. Perhaps she's the next contender for a monument. You heard it here first. But without playing down her call for equality for, as she said, half the planet, let's not forget her role as part of the Enlightenment. Without its place in allowing us to finally break free from a catch-all excuse for the preservation of the status quo that is tradition, I certainly wouldn't be here today in this capacity. The use of reason to deconstruct power structures and to think through policies, education for civic participation, and the idea that we can all work on ourselves to become better people. These are Enlightenment ideas that spring to mind when I think of Mary. Indeed, I sometimes feel I carry her ghost with me as I walk through Hackney. Perhaps many of us here tonight carry our own versions of Mary around. My own particular Mary is, present tense, a woman who fundamentally just wants a fair go. She has perhaps something of a Greta Thunberg about her. She knows what the easy way is. She is smart enough to see what people want her to say, what will tick the boxes and get her through the day easily. But she has seen behind the curtain and now knows what she cannot unknow. She cannot pretend. She cannot fake. Pandora's paradigm box of ill-justified inequality has been opened. There are too many questions. There are too many inconsistencies. There are weak points in the socially constructed walls that have been built around her. She can do nothing else but poke at these obvious fault lines. How could she not? And so, like Thunberg, she knows what it means to be perceived as awkward. Why can't she just? Another writer and thinker who has walked the streets of Paris like myself and Mary before me is the art flaneuse Dr. Lauren Elkin. She writes of the intellectual enfant terrible Susan Sontag. She was an enemy of the pieties that people seemed to want from writers, then as now. There would always be plenty of other people happy to provide them. Why should she voluntarily blend into the din? Mary just couldn't. Greta just couldn't. Post-World War II, Hannah Arendt just couldn't. They are Edmund Burke's grasshoppers in a field of silent cattle. Today, Sisters Uncut agitate against the police bill. But are these examples of difficult women, or women raising difficult questions? As we remember Mary, as we contemplate our role in the world today, are we willing to walk in her footsteps? This month, COVID is biting in the global south. It's not long since we refused to release the vaccine patents that could have saved so many from death. Who will protest this? Where are today's moral philosophers questioning the values behind these decisions? Echoing the words of another Hackney changemaker, Catherine Booth of the Salvation Army, are we willing to rock the boat today for a better world tomorrow? For some, the choice to speak your truth is actually no choice at all. They can only push in one direction. They cannot stand still. To quote contemporary questioner Kay Tempest, all life is forwards. And so, as she walks among us today, where would Mary want us to go next? Thank you, Simon. Next, we are going to hear from David Walter, who is a congregant here at New Unity and is going to share some of Mary's words.
Learn from me, if not by my precepts, then by my example. How dangerous is the pursuit of knowledge, and how much happier is that man who believes his native town to be the world, than he who aspires to be greater than his nature will allow. Youth is the season for love in both sexes, but in those days of thoughtless enjoyment, provision should be made for the more important years of life, when reflection takes place of sensation. But Rousseau and most of the male writers who have followed his steps have warmly inculcated that the whole tendency of female education ought to be directed to one point, to render them pleasing. Let me reason with the supporters of this opinion who have any knowledge of human nature. Do they imagine that marriage can eradicate the habitude of life? The woman who has only been taught to please will soon find that her charms are oblique sunbeams, and that they cannot have much effect on her husband's heart when they are seen every day, when the summer is past and gone. Will she then have sufficient native energy to look into herself for comfort and cultivate her dormant faculties? Or is it not more rational to accept that she will try to please other men, and in the emotions raised by the expectation of new conquests, endeavour to forget the mortification her love or pride has received? When the husband ceases to be a lover, and the time will inevitably come, her desire of pleasing will then grow languid or become a spring of bitterness. And love, perhaps the most effervescent of all passions, gives place to jealousy or vanity. The most holy band of society is friendship. It has been well said by a shrewd satirist that rare as true love is, true friendship is still rarer. This is an obvious truth, and the cause not lying deep, but not elude a slight glance of inquiry. Love, the common passion in which chance and sensation take place of choice and reason, is in some degree left by the mass of mankind, for it is not necessary to speak at present of the emotions that rise above or sink below love. This passion, naturally increased by suspense and difficulties, draws the mind out of its accustomed state and exalts the affections. But the security of marriage, allowing the fever of love to subside, a healthy temperature is thought insipid only by those who have not sufficient intellect to substitute the calm tenderness of friendship, the confidence of respect, instead of blind admiration and the sensual emotions of fondness.
Thank you, David. We're next going to hear from Deborah, who's also congregant of New Unity and did an awful lot of the work into installing the new plaque to celebrate Mary Wollstonecraft in the building, which unfortunately we haven't been able to kind of have a grand reveal because of the pandemic, but we're really excited to show new visitors in the near future.
Thank you, Amy. Hello, I'm Deborah Hinton. I organized the creation of a new plaque dedicated to Mary Wollstonecraft in this Newington Green Meeting House. I take you back. July 2018. It was announced the Meeting House would receive funding from the National Lottery Fund to restore the Meeting House and to recover the dissenters' legacy at the birthplace of feminism. The birthplace of feminism. Of course, we think of Mary Wollstonecraft. Mary Wollstonecraft lived and worked on Newington Green and attended this church. However, the Meeting House did not have a plaque to Mary Wollstonecraft. And so, on the final Sunday gathering before restoration works began, I became determined that when the Meeting House reopened, there would be a new plaque honoring Mary Wollstonecraft's life and legacy. And so I began. First, I visited the Meeting House before the restoration work started. I met Andy Pakula, the new Unity minister. Inside the Meeting House, it was empty and quiet. We looked, we discussed, we measured, and ideas for the plaque's design began to emerge. But I had never had a plaque made before. Where should I start? How should I start? I knew I must talk to Roberta Wedge, a new Unity member and a Mary Wollstonecraft expert. We met at St. Pancras Old Church, where Mary Wollstonecraft had married William Godwin and where Mary had been buried. Roberta and I sat on a bench in the churchyard in the warm sunshine for a long time. We talked and talked. Thank you, Roberta. Thank you so much for your help and your guidance. Roberta suggested I attend the upcoming event, a celebration of Mary Wollstonecraft, to be held on April 27th, 2019. It would be the 260th anniversary of Mary Wollstonecraft's birth and a celebration of her life, her writing, and her legacy. And indeed, I did attend. Held at St. Pancras Old Church that day, I was introduced to the wonderful world of Mary Wollstonecraft. 8:30 a.m., Roberta's tour of Wollstonecraft's Bloomsbury began, a day full of discussions, panels, talks, socializing, displays, birthday cake, a new film, and so much more. The Wollstonecraft Fellowship, the Mary Wollstonecraft Philosophical Society, Mary and the Green, the Wollstonecraft Society, academics and authors. In the evening, many of us gathered at Somerstown Coffee House for drinks and dinner and conversation. Absolutely buzzing, more ideas for the new plaque. I learned so much from many remarkable people on that day. Now for the steps ahead. The materials, the words, the proof, the approval, and of course, getting the plaque made and installed in time for the reopening of the Meeting House and for the next big Mary Wollstonecraft event, Mary Wollstonecraft in Dissent, a celebration, which was scheduled for April 24th and 25th, 2020, and would be held here in the Newington Green Meeting House. The stonemason was chosen, Collins and Curtis Masonry in Ipswich. Many thanks to Jeremy Wade of Collins and Curtis for all his help in making our new Mary Wollstonecraft plaque. The new plaque would commemorate Mary Wollstonecraft's life and legacy and her association with Newington Green Meeting House, be in keeping with existing plaques, have a back piece of black slate, hand engraved, have a front piece of the best quality white statuary marble, hand engraved. And once the design was finalized and the proof was made, Roberta and I visited the Meeting House. I wanted to be double sure the plaque would look right in its assigned location in the Meeting House, above the pew where Mary is thought to have sat. By now, building works were well underway, and the inside of the Meeting House was barely recognizable with scaffolding, and Roberta and I had to wear construction helmets. Up went the proof. All good. The plaque would look right in its designated place. Next step, approval from the new Unity's trustees. Done. Approval received. And now the search for the perfect marble. One piece arrives. Not good enough. Another piece arrives. Not good enough. Finally, a few frustrating months later, the stonemason calls me. It's arrived. An excellent piece has arrived. I drive to Ipswich to see the marble, and it's beautiful. The engraving begins. I so wanted the plaque to be completed and installed by March 1st, 2020, when the meeting house would reopen, and most certainly by April 24th for the big Mary Wollstonecraft event. And it was. The plaque was completed and installed in time. However, the meeting house has had to remain closed. So, Mary Wollstonecraft's plaque has been here, waiting for us to be here together in this meeting house, to come and observe, to listen and reflect, and to be amazed by and moved by all that was Mary Wollstonecraft's life. Mary Wollstonecraft lived and worked on Newington Green and attended this church. Philosopher, human rights pioneer, travel writer, educationalist, author of A Vindication of the Rights of Woman. We commemorate her life and her legacy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deborah, not just for those lovely words, but also for all the hard work that you put into making that plaque happen. Thank you very much. And we're going to finish up now with some words from Wendy Forrest, you might recognise from Hackney History Society. Wendy.
Thank you, Amy. And these aren't my words, but Mary's, again, remarks from Vindication. Man is prepared for a future state. Woman only to provide for the present. Gentleness, docility, and a spaniel-like affection are on this ground consistently recommended as the cardinal virtues of the sex. She was created to be the toy of man, his rattle, and it was jingle in his ears whenever, dismissing reason, he chooses to be amused. Women were made to be loved and must not aim at respect, lest they be hunted out of society as masculine. Do passive, indolent women make the best wives? Have women who have early imbibed notions of passive obedience sufficient character to manage a family or educate children? I will venture to predict that woman will be either the friend or the slave of man. If they are really capable of acting like rational creatures, let them not be treated like slaves. I view with indignation the mistaken notions that enslave my sex. I love man as my fellow, but his sceptre extends not to me. Females have been insulted, and while they have been stripped of the virtues that should clothe humanity, they have been decked with artificial graces. Their sole ambition is to be fair, to raise emotion instead of respect, and this ignoble desire destroys all strength of character. Liberty is the mother of virtue, and if some are by their very constitution slaves and are not allowed to breathe the sharp, invigorating air of freedom, they must ever languish like exotics and be reckoned the beautiful flaw in nature. The subjection in which the sex has ever been held retorts on men. The many have always been enthralled by the few, and monsters have tyrannized over thousands of their fellow creatures. Why have men submitted to such degradation? For is it not universally acknowledged that kings have ever been inferior in abilities and virtue to the same number of men taken from the common mass of mankind? Brutal force has hitherto governed the world. As sound politics diffuse liberty, mankind, including woman, will become more wise and virtuous.
everyone for taking part in that. That was wonderful, really nice. And it was nice to mark the plaque, because we've not, even in a small way, I mean, it'll be really nice when it's full of people, but just in a small way, that was